Hi, I'm Joni Moore, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on the East Coast fisheries collapse. I'm going to start with just a brief introduction. Fishing is of key importance to the Canadian industry, and the main marine fishery is located in Atlantic Canada. It's been a critical component of the economy for centuries. Originally, the main species was the North Atlantic cod, but in recent years it's focused more on shrimp, crab, and lobster. And seafood was our second largest food export from Canada in 2015. There's roughly 72,000 people that are currently employed in occupations related to fishing related activities. Okay, so the collapse. The collapse really demonstrated the importance of proper management of our resource ecosystems. So what happened was Canada's cod industry had been one of the most abundant in the world. The northern cod was really the backbone of the culture and the tradition in the Atlantic Maritime provinces. And in 1976, the government enacted a jurisdiction to keep foreigners out of their waters. They were worried about overfishing, but the overfishing just continued because Canada replaced those boats with boats of their own. They had trawlers and draggers, and one of the main problems was that the fishery scientists were using inadequate models to measure the fish stock, and they were saying that the stock was high. The locals didn't feel that that was the case. They were catching less fish, and the fish that they were catching were smaller. In 1989, the government put a limit on the amount of fish that could be caught. Unfortunately, that didn't do the job, and in July of 1992, Canada's Federal Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans was forced to enact a moratorium until they thought May 1994. It was the largest government closure of an industry in Canadian history. The government ended up spending about $3.9 billion for compensation and rebuilding, and 1993, more areas were closed, but sadly in 2003, what was left was completely shut down of the cod fishing, and the North Atlantic cod was listed as an endangered species. Scientists say that there was a 97% decline in that stock in 30 years. So just a quick video here of sort of a summary of what I just explained.
Where for them to hide. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, modern technology found its way to the high seas, the spawning grounds of the northern cod, and a systematic process of elimination began. 12 months of the year, 24 hours a day, they fished. A large Canadian fleet, but foreigners too. The Spanish, Portuguese, and the Russians. From 1962 to 1977 alone, the harvestable biomass of the northern cod dropped 82%. Scientists kept overestimating the stock size. And Canadian politicians kept setting higher quotas. But inshore, the thousands of fishermen who also relied on that fish could see what was happening. Glenn Winslow certainly could.
Because we see the catch rates going down. You know, And, I mean, and I'll tell you another thing we see the fish getting smaller.
Okay, so what were the reasons for the collapse? There's a few. Particularly, as was mentioned, there was a lot of pressure put on the fisheries by politicians and bureaucrats, those that were in charge of Canada's Atlantic fisheries. Another thing was in 1950s, there was the creation of the offshore trawlers. There was continued technology being created, such as radar and navigational systems, both of those encouraging overfishing. As mentioned earlier, the international draggers were banned in 1997 due to strong evidence that they were overfishing. They were given a 200 nautical mile limit, fishing limit. Once they had eliminated the large fish stock, they changed their nets, made them smaller, and began fishing the smaller fish, smaller and smaller. And it's thought that the domestic fishers were reporting only about 50% of their catch as well. Obviously, a main part of the problem was that scientists didn't predict the collapse, and their procedures for sampling the population were just inadequate. They had inadequate ecological information. The locals were trying to tell them that they were suspecting a problem, but the scientists wanted quantitative data. So I've got a video of a demonstration of a bottom trawler.
A bottom trawl is a type of fishing net that's pulled along the seafloor. Fishermen commonly use bottom trawls to catch shrimp and bottom-dwelling fish like halibut and sole. In addition to these target fish, however, the nets also catch a variety of ocean life that's usually thrown back dead or dying. Dragging heavy gear across the seabed can also damage sensitive seafloor habitat. Reducing the harmful effects of bottom trawling requires either modifying the fishing gear or limiting the areas where trawling is allowed to protect sensitive bottom-dwelling organisms and their habitat.
So, environmental contributors. In the past, they thought that there was issues with seal predation and cold water. In 1991, the ocean was measured as the coldest ever, which may have contributed, but since then, scientific evidence has shown that seal predation was not the cause of the collapse, but overfishing. Currently, there's issues due to increased global population, climate change. Obviously, warming waters is not good for a cold water species like the North Atlantic cod. Ocean acidification, overexploitation of one species puts pressure on other species within that ecosystem and food chain. There's pollution, plastics, ghost fishing. Ghost fishing is when fishermen either discard or lose parts of their fishing equipment, nets, things of that sort, and wildlife and fish species are caught within it and die. There's also the problem of capturing and using for the codfish, the capture and use of shrimp being a main component of their diet, with shrimp being a main source of the fisheries now. It's putting a strain on the cod for that reason. And there's always the threat of illegal fishing practices occurring out of sight of consumers and regulators. So another video on same sort of thing.
The disappearance of the cod too. You know, there's nothing environmental about overfishing. You know, you're taking too much, and you know, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, species can't take the pressure.
You can't. You know, you just can't.
How much cod do you suppose has been landed here over the centuries?
I can imagine a fair bit was landed here.
And now the pressure is back on the federal fisheries scientists to allow them to, once again, increase northern cod fishing. But 25 years later, the spawning biomass is still barely a third the size it needs to be to sustain a commercial fishery. Where did your grandfather fish?
He fished off Western Bay.
Karen Dwyer is the government's lead biologist on northern cod. She's heard the fisheries union calling to increase quotas. She's resisting. Do you feel that pressure?
That pressure is definitely there, especially for fisheries managers. I think because the stock is still where it is in that lower half of the critical zone, I think that it's not the answer right now, but it does indicate we need to be more careful with what we're doing on this stock.
Yeah, we can't get this wrong twice.
No.
Yeah.
The disappearance of the cod.
So that was a video from the CBC National from 2017. So what lessons can we learn from this? Current management of ecological resources might be faulty, and it could be leading to the complete elimination of some species. Management of fisheries and other resources need to fully include all components. Scientists involved should comprehensively understand the biophysical resource system. They also need to be taking advice from the locals. They have ecological information that can be valuable. It's also important to understand the economy and the politics of regions. Science can't be assumed as a certainty, and it's always important to take a precautionary approach to ensure that the entire ecosystem is safe and not just one species. So today, the Atlantic cod population has sadly not returned to its former state, and for it to ever successfully return, there's going to need to be a rebuilding that is gradual and done under sustainable practices. Our Prime Minister has implemented what's called the Ocean Plastics Charter to help with plastic pollution within the ocean. It ensures that plastics are designed for repair, reuse, and recycling, and they put an emphasis on recovery to prevent waste and pollution. So also, again, to mention that there has been a dramatic increase on seafood exports by Canada over the last decade. Exports to China have quadrupled. There's just an increasing demand worldwide. And all of this is managed by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. They are responsible for creating and implementing sustainable programs and policies that protect ecological, economic, and scientific interests in the ocean. Overfishing worldwide is causing increasing negative effects on the health of our oceans. It's important to remain involved in the politics surrounding this and supporting initiatives and policies for the health of our oceans. And that's the end. Thanks for listening.